All right. So happy Pride, everyone. Welcome to, I've lost count. I believe this is our 16th live chat for Pride Month this year. So we're doing quite well. And tonight's agenda is Macho Man. Now, for some of you who've been following us since year one, we hosted a session like this in 2018 where we got a group of straight identifying males and gay and queer identifying males together in a room. And we had some very open, hard at times, but overall very engaging conversations about macho culture and some of the issues that LGBTQI persons face, at the hands of our, and we're speaking generally, of course, but our straight male counterparts are persons who, show homophobic tendencies or have homophobic mindsets, etc. And all of that leads to in society everything from bullying, discrimination, violence, etc. And we started unpacking it there, and we thought we'd bring actually it was in that year it was the most viewed live. We didn't have as many lives back then, but it definitely traveled and there was much interest in it, and Marcus Kissoon was one of the participants in that session, and people have been asking us to have it again, so we thought this year would be a suitable year to bring it back. Happy Pride, Vicky. Thanks for that. And shout out to Stuart as well, who joined us on the live. Uh, so, what are we trying to do this year? As you all know, we do have to contend with the COVID-19 restrictions. So, most, if not all, of our activities this month have been online. But it allowed us to take the time to have these types of conversations and to use technology in a different way. And that in particular aligned with this year's mantra of PrideTT 2.0, taking Pride to the next level. And our theme, of course, is be empowered by our pride. That's the theme that will guide us from now until next year's Pride. And we have been having discussions that center around not just the positives and the highlights of the community, but also unpacking some of those issues that we deal with that prevent us from being empowered. So tonight again, we're exploring and unpacking macho man culture, and we're not quite sure where we will go on this journey tonight, but we have with us none other than Marcus Kissoon. Marcus is a long dear friend of mine and many others in the community. I first met him when I began my HIV/AIDS, MSM, and LGBTQI activism uh, almost 20 years ago. And since then, we've been we've had the type of friendship where we can agree to disagree at times, but we've always seen eye to eye on the issue of saving lives. And Marcus, we're very happy to have you here with us tonight. And I always like people to introduce themselves because you know what you'd like to share with people rather than, us reading out a cold bio. And if you give me a chance, I'll probably talk for another half an hour about all of the work that you've been doing in the community and elsewhere. But tell us, who is Marcus Kissoon? Before we start tonight, share with those of us on the call who may have only heard of you or may not know of you. What would you like them to know about you and your work?
Um, well, first and foremost, I'm an activist, feminist, and I've been part of the women's movement since 2008. And I think what is vital about that is that a large part of women's struggle and the issues that women and girls face really stem from ideas around patriarchy and the valuing around particular kinds of masculinity and femininity. And as that part of my life grew in 2013, I started investigating and having a greater interest on male survivors of sexual assault. And I used a gender lens or a gender analysis to understand how masculine bodies also have complex realities as it relates to sexual assault and domestic violence. Around particular kinds of masculinity and femininity. Again, a feedback. Again, a feedback. Right. So yeah, so I would say from 2013, I formally, you know, dove into understanding certain kinds of masculinities, more so how it impacts on persons who subscribe or who have perceived weaker masculinities, who are put in roles of weaker masculinity, so what we call a subordinated masculinity. So I've really been doing this type of gender work and gender justice work through this kind of masculine lens from my early career in 2008 and then formally in 2013 to now, where I've written a thesis around that. So I do think that I may be able to shed some light. I may not be able to shed all light, but I could, and I am interested in all of us unpacking our own experiences with masculinity tonight. I'm not hearing you.
Sorry, darling. Yes, I also wanted, before we get right into the discussion, I wanted to give you a chance to perhaps talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with the Indo drag community. I think that's important as well. What would you like to share with us about that work and where you're headed with it?
Oh, well, I'm actually working on a short documentary celebrating and highlighting the contributions of Indo-Caribbean drag performers, both here in Trinidad and in the diaspora in global north, which is like New York and Canada. And I'm actually just trying to, look at different ways that activism has been taking place in our region, not just marches and not just like these new contemporary Zoom and online platforms, but how Indo-Caribbean drags have been performing at Indian weddings and multi-tours and different spaces in Indian culture, pushing against the grain of gender respectability, queerness. And I think it's a good opportunity for us now to look at different ways in which we as diverse people have been doing this type of work and not really being given the spotlight in a larger queer movement, so I'm really trying to just put forward those in the Caribbean queer lives that has been making contributions. Yeah.
Well, we really look forward to that and your continued work. I know that you were able to travel to World Pride last year and you worked with the Caribbean Equality Project as well. You all should check them out on Instagram and social media. They've been doing some amazing work, a group of Caribbean people up there in New York. And you'll see some of Marcus's work that is also published on their pages. So with all of that being said, let's get into it. So Marcus, I did some homework because I know you're a big time academic, so I had to prepare myself for this evening's discourse, I looked up the word macho, and I came upon, of course, the word machismo, right? And it is defined in certain dictionaries as a strong or exaggerated sense of manliness, an assumptive attitude that virility, courage, strength, and entitlement, which is a word we commonly meet in our struggles, right? An entitlement to dominate are attributes or concomitants of masculinity. So that's a lot of words inside of there, right? I'll just read it one more time for the audience members. A strong or exaggerated sense of manliness, an assumptive attitude that virility, courage, strength, and entitlement to dominate are attributes or concomitants of masculinity. So tell us, Marcus, help us to unpack all of that inside of there, or maybe even use your own definition. When someone talks about macho culture, or even before we get to the culture, when we just talk about being macho or having machismo, what are we really talking about?
So let's go right down to like fundamental foundation work around gender, understanding gender. And I think we need to understand that machismo, macho is a very Latin American concept that really describes masculinity, or what we consider hegemonic masculinity, or um, the most attainable form of masculinity in any particular culture. Now we have to understand is that masculinity, machismoism, culture is socially constructed. So in different spaces, the ideas around what it means to be masculine, most masculine, hegemonic masculine, hyper masculine, right, will vary, right? So the roles and the rules and the expectations and the attitudes and the beliefs that come with it will shift from different spaces. So I really want us to understand that these ideas are socially constructed. They're not things that we're born with, right? Society, you know, gives us this blueprint that the minute you are born male presenting, male, right, biologically male, you're automatically expected to behave, think, and contribute in a particular kind of way. And really and truly, that is what machismo is saying. It is saying that this is what makes you the ultimate man in a particular society, especially in Latin American culture. So machismo is very Latin American in terms of language, right? And we kind of use more like hegemonic, kind of more like hyper masculine, or even if we want to use local terms, for example, we could see the bajon, the idea of the bajon, right, being a kind of a desired masculine in some of the literature work, like what S. Naipaul wrote, right? That everybody wants to be the bajon, the most feared, the most known. Um, you know, he is he is he is you know he's not easily shaken by ideas of strength and weakness. Um, and most importantly, also in a context like this, is that hypermasculinity, machismo, also is synonymous with heterosexuality. So when looking at the social constructs, people tell us that machismo, as you're using for this particular platform, right? And I will continue using machismo. Is normally synonymous with leadership. So men are normally expected to be leaders. Men are expected to also be in control, dominant. They're expected to be emotionless, aggressive. They're expected to also be interested in women, right? And that is the the celebrated and most valued form of masculinity in actually most cultures across the globe, right? So I want us to understand that those ideas of being machismo has been given to us by religion, by other social structures like parents, our parents, um, movies and videos, music videos, lyrics, and even literature like novels, right? Really shape the way in which we understand our masculinities, right? And what is respected, what is valued, and what is celebrated, and then what is shunned away, and what becomes oppressed and limited or devalued, right? So yeah.
So, without getting too technical or going into the anthropology of it all, what we're getting is that this is something that we've inherited over millennia from way back when. Um, People sometimes, I don't want to use the word counter, but the debate sometimes pivots around, men are made to do certain things and women are made to do certain things. And they point all the way back, I guess, to the very dawn of humankind. And then they look at like the the first set of wars and conquering different lands, and how children were cared for, etc. Again, not to get too technical, but is are we correct in saying that that is all part of what is mixed up inside of here, even in the year 2020? Is that sort of what has colored the as you say, the Latin American culture, maybe some other cultures across the globe, that has created this focus on masculinities and what it means to be a man?
Right. So again, multiple things enforce what we know to be masculine. One is a social structure put in place to ensure that men maintains a kind of superiority position, which is the patriarchy. Right? The patriarchy is not no one man. It's a social structure that values all that is androcentric or male-centered over what is women. Right? It has stemmed from the idea of biology, right? And it also stems from places of power where, some patriarchal leaders wanted to conquer and own things. And as a result, men were told that in order to have power, you had to conquer, you had to be dominant, you had to fight wars, right? I think what is important for us to note in this time in 2020 is that the biology is not the argument here. We are not arguing that women can't do something or that gay men can't do something. We're
Right.
debating accessibility. No one should be given less access to anything because they don't live up to particular kinds of masculinities. And in this case, I'm arguing those who subscribe, because we have to also understand that masculinities is plural, right? That there are multiple forms of masculinities, right? And it exists in multiple places, but only certain kinds of masculinities exist and are valued, right? And we have to also remember that masculinity is in a binary to femininity. And anything that is feminine goes against masculinity, and the patriarchy don't allow for us to engage in that. And that is why queer communities, gay men, because they challenge ideas of what it means to be a man in social structures, and more so they challenge what it means to be as a sexual being, right? Because of some of us who attain to homosexual experiences, right? That goes against what the patriarchy wants as dominant, powerful, leading, emotionless, heterosexual masculinity in a given society, right?
So let's break down some of these things, right?
Uh-huh.
So I I think we're following the origins of the issue. But when you made a very clear distinction there about the patriarchy,
Mm-hmm.
especially in modern world. Let's unpack that a little bit then.
Sure.
Talk some more about the systems, and when you use that word, people may not understand. They may have heard it, they may understand the meaning of the word, but what does it really mean in a social, cultural context, especially like ours here in Trinidad and Tobago?
Mm-hmm. So the patriarchy really privileges men
Mm-hmm.
foremost. So those who are cisgender presenting, definitely born with a penis. However, we know that a penis doesn't make you masculine. It is not the only marker of being male or masculine, right? So the patriarchy really is a system that ensures that those who subscribe or who we expect to subscribe to masculinity or to masculine notions are privileged in given societies. And not all men attain the same privileges, as we know, right? Historically, slave masters who were white men with white power, right, was the was the desired masculinity. That's what everybody attained for. Everybody, so indentured laborers, males, and African men wanted to have those ideas of power and masculinity, which was to have wives, women, property, own people, own positions of power, which shape the way in which we see masculinity today. Right? The most masculine of men are not just those who present masculine in terms of tall, strong, athletic, right? But are also those who are successful in attaining career and making money, right? Who are successful in having sexual intercourse with multiple women, right? Are able to have multiple children. I mean, some people would say that their father's generation, older generation, so like our grandfather generation, there are stories where those men exercise hypermasculinity or machismo by having multiple families in multiple spaces, right? And they also attain masculinity by ensuring that all these families was well taken care of. So you have multiple women with multiple children, and you were able to financially support for all of them because that's what men do. Right? So, and the thing is, the patriarchy has ensured that certain kinds of men, right, who live up to it at that point in time. So patriarchal systems also exist in particular spaces, right? So, for example, a national patriarchy, for Trinidad might be those who have good jobs, good education, look a particular way, live in a particular community, right? However, if we look at masculinities in subcategories, you like to talk about QRC and your experience in an all-boys school. For me, I've seen the masculinities in an all-boy brown school, which was Hillview, right? To be the most masculine, you have to be athletic. If you're not so athletic, you get a kind of passing privilege. If you were bright, come from money, right? But the minute that you don't subscribe to those ideas of masculinity, so you either stayed by yourself and you were a little bit effeminate, you didn't live up to it, and as a social structure that maintain access to certain things, the patriarchy didn't allow certain people to have access to certain things, right? Like respect, right?
Right.
So because you were effeminate and didn't play football, you didn't get a kind of you were more prone to bullying.
Right.
Right? And bullying and homophobia becomes ways of ensuring particular kinds of masculinities exist.
So it serves either to force you to normalize and become part of the patriarchy and reinforce it, or to exclude you, basically. And that of course continues into adulthood. So before I know people are on these calls sometimes are a little stingy. They want to know all about the rainbow people. But I guess to make a connection, right? Uh, let's talk a moment first about what the machismo and the patriarchy means for women in society, or what it has meant and still continues to mean for women first. Let's give that some airing.
I think that's an awesome place to begin because the patriarchy allows for anything that is feminine to be opposite of what it means to be masculine. And I think that patriarchy has said that male superiority, women inferiority, right? In very basic understanding, that is what they're saying, all right? And I want us to know that because of these values around masculinity, right? Women have been limited in accessing all that the social pie has to offer. That includes education, maybe not in Trinidad per se, in the same way India and the Middle East and Africa may have it, right? But it impacts the way in which women access education. It access the way the way women access employment and family life. So the reasons why men get married become different from the reasons why women get married, right? And it also impacts the way in which women are safe, Because a lot of the domestic violence, sexual assault that occur is really reinforced by patriarchal ideas around men being powerful, dominant, and women being submissive. And the patriarchy is a kind of a subconscious social system that ensures that men uses their position of power to ensure that they maintain power and control, and women becomes victim and prey because the structure of life means that we have to ensure that women maintain being subordinated, being docile, being submissive. So that is how women, in a nutshell, become affected by patriarchy and by ideas of masculinity. Right?
Because we sometimes hear persons in gender activism or in other spaces talk about rape culture. Is that related to what I mean, it may sound like an obvious question, but is it related to what we're talking about? And what is rape culture?
Yeah, so rape culture is definitely different from a culture of rape. A culture of rape is where we know that rape becomes almost um synonymous with daily living or everyday experience for women. A culture of rape means that there are particular attributes that perpetuate the dominance of women's bodies, the devaluing of women's bodies, the objectification of women's bodies. And we see a rape culture in particular lyrics, right? When women's bodies become objectified for male pleasure, male gaze, for the male lens, right? We also see that rape culture exists in simple things like when we say that, after 12 is lunch. That is not rape per se, but it's perpetuating a culture that you have the right to objectify, overpower, take control, right, of a 12-year-old's body, right? So, yeah.
I think part of this debate did take place during the matter on the Child Marriage Act. I was myself taken aback by some of the positions adopted by persons in society, where exactly what we are talking about here came to the fore. You heard people using these gender stereotypes and using these tropes that belong in the realm of the patriarchy to justify why we should allow this practice to continue. Which, and of course, with the religion, you mentioned it earlier, with religion as well as one of the, what should I say, one of the supporting elements of the justification. So how do we balance those concepts where you have some religious beliefs that seem to seek to justify the patriarchy, justify the tropes, justify the cultures and norms that allow this to continue, and the effects of which we see on the newspapers every day? How do we balance those things?
Yeah, one of the explanations for example, child marriage is the maintenance of cultural legacy, right? People are saying that we've been doing this for years, this is how it has been done. I think what is ideal, especially in asking men, male leaders, patriarchy generally, and people who are invested in ending things like child marriage, is, is quite frankly is for us to listen to the voices of those who they are oppressing, right? I think that we feel as men to not we want to perpetuate things that maintain our power. So as a religious leader, I know, yeah, the culture of child marriage was a thing that allowed for me to have power, that allowed for me to have religious power, right? In society, that allowed for us to see men as particular types of strength and in control and to maintain certain things with women. And the fact is that it doesn't matter if the religious beliefs is one thing. The thing is that women were crying out and calling out to end the notions of child marriage because it was affecting their daily lives. It was affecting their ability to access education, to access careers, and it was opening them up to violence. So it's not a matter of what cultural teachings have to say about it. It's that people's lives were being affected by these notions, by these religious beliefs.
Sohan is making a point that he's saying it's not so much religiously supported, it's culturally religion and culture. It's culturally religion and culture isn't necessarily the same thing. Um, I think we take that point, but help us unpack it just a little bit further then. Because I have heard you speak elsewhere, and I mean, the work that you're doing, for example, with the Indian drag scene, there is a line between religion and culture, but they intersect, right? And an impact on what we're discussing and what is perpetuated. Help us unpack that a little bit.
Culture is an umbrella term to explain the way in which, or the values, the systems, the behaviors, the traditions of a given society, right? Religion influences that um, particular culture. So we have a culture around um, Hindu festivals, which is so we like ideas culturally. We have worship and all of that, which is influenced by religious doctrines. So he's right. There is a difference. Culture is the umbrella organization, which can be made up of multiple things, right? And religion just being one of them, right? And a lot of the teachings and values that we have come from the stories, the narratives of the Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Quran, right? Which are also perpetuated by male religious leaders. And male religious leaders will tell stories in patriarchal ways and norms, right?
I know
So
we. No, you're
so
right. Sorry, go ahead. Finish your point.
so I'm just saying it's just more complicated than just language, but it's really about all of these all these pieces coming together to shape the way in which people exist in their masculine, feminine, and in our queerness.
It's interesting. We do say here. I'll make a little plug here. We do say at PrideTT that everything we do there has a strategy behind it. And we did have in the very first week or so of Pride a discussion on faith, LGBTQ faith. And we had on that call the Dean of the Anglican Church, Dean Tenya. And as a woman, she also spoke about some of the issues that religion has created for women. And I mean, we don't want to, we didn't come here tonight to just blame and zone in on religion, but I think it is such an important aspect of many of our lives, even LGBTQI people, because we always make the point we are people of faith and we sometimes have to balance that out. So I want to get into that a little bit later again, but let me pivot you to something then. We understand how it can then impact women or people who identify either as femme, woman, or who people perceive in that way. Because we're talking a lot about perceptions, as you said earlier. It's how people perceive you and if they think you meet a certain standard, right? Because the one of the truths that we see is that yes, the typical normalized heterosexual macho man will have a subjective perspective on men, and you talked about the objectification and the sexualization of women's bodies, etc. But they also have a view then towards women they believe don't meet the standard that they think women should meet. So it goes both ways, right? In their mind, they have these buckets that, and again, we're trying to speak from their perspective, right? There are these buckets that the binary genders that they see should fit within. So to Vicky's asking a question then that's related to that observation, and she says, well, what about transsexualism? I mean, how would the idea of a transsexual really play in the mind of persons who look at life that way? Because I mean, they're dealing with men on one side and women on one side in their mind, right? And now they have to deal with this other identity. Is that perhaps one of the reasons why trans persons in particular, and I'm sort of asking this question so that we could explore the issue, right? But is that perhaps one of the reasons why trans persons in particular suffer so much? I mean, we hate to compare suffering, but you know what I'm getting at, that they tend to be even more marginalized. Is that part of it?
Right. So I think what we should really, what I would like to take you through is the fact that patriarchy ensures that we maintain masculine, feminine, right? And the way that we maintain that those binaries still exist is through something called homophobia, right?
Okay, so
No,
we've
it's
come to the word,
important.
right? Go ahead.
So inform, so you know, outside of us as queer people who understand homophobia as an attack on the way that we exist as gender and sexual beings, right? Homophobia actually, right, affects all men, right? Homophobia ensures that men are maintained on the masculine side of the spectrum, right? That is why homophobic comments are put across in all spaces where men gather, on the football field, right? In classrooms, wherever, right?
In the
So
corporate world.
in the corporate world, right? So we have to understand that homophobia wants to ensure that all men are masculine, masculine presenting, masculine in beliefs, and more so heterosexual, right? So what I'm getting at is that homophobia affects everyone, whether they subscribe to queer lives or not, or heterosexual lives. Homophobia ensures that everybody is placed right back in hegemonic masculinity, superiority, or what we would call, you know, back into that box of men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Homophobia ensures that every man who's born stays in Mars and all women stays in Venus, right? And right, and homophobia becomes that tool that ensures that we stay there. So I think that is a good place for us to understand that, because once we understand what are the norms or the notions of masculinity, anything that steps out of that becomes oppressed, becomes devalued, becomes markers for homophobia and transphobia, right? And the thing is, I'm glad that, you know, the trans coalition is actually the one who's, you know, supporting me to have this conversation today, is because, you know, trans persons push against all the grain of gender and sexuality, right? For example, trans women push against what it means to be born as male and push against being female and wanting to express as female or as feminine as possible, right? Then also they push against, you know, being born male and then liking males, right? So it really goes against the grain of what is normal in a particular society, right? And this is the foundation as to why trans women are oppressed, are affected, because they push against the grain of staying within their boxes, masculine and feminine.
So, you know, it seems that, so okay, let me ask a very provocative question then. Can gay men be part of the patriarchy? Can they be machismo and chauvinistic and imbue these very homophobic attributes that we ourselves are victims of?
Yes, definitely. The gay community, men generally are living in patriarchal notions, um, and they are reproducers of it, even within the gay community. And again, so let's just look at global north, for example. Look at Pride in New York, for example. Pride is very white male centered, right? It denies the access of women, femininity, um, and even colored men. Because remember, I said not all men live up to the hegemonic. So in a culture where white superiority exists, right, which is global north, we could see how white male men, cisgendered, right, have access to the forefront of the movement, right, becomes the most celebrated, the most attainable, the most respectable, right? That's why the Trans Coalition has been asking for the T to be put at the front, because we want those who experience on multiple levels of oppression, homophobia, transphobia, to be understood firstly, right? So yeah, so gay men are perpetuators of patriarchy, sexism, and even homophobia, because they try to ensure that gay men who are feminine, right, are either devalued, shamed, bullied, right, or just not even considered in their circle, right? So yeah, so gay men do perpetuate those stereotypes.
So let's really dig into that, because I asked the question deliberately, as I've heard persons say that that could never be the case. In their mind, they believe that because gay men generally are seen as less than, that they themselves could never be reinforcers of this patriarchy, right? So let's go even deeper with it then. So you're saying that we grew up in a society where there are these cultural norms that are reinforced by many different things historically and even in a contemporary situation, whether it's the systems, the judiciary, religion, legislation, what have you. So you're growing up in this society and you are on one hand a victim of it because you are seen as less than, you're excluded, you're viewed by some as not meeting that macho grade. But then you yourself begin to perpetuate the culture onto others. In your studies and in your training, what is that? What is that named, and how do you unbox that even more?
I think what's vital is that there are hierarchies
Mm-hmm.
that exist, and at the utmost top, which we explain, the hegemonic is straight, heterosexual, with all the characteristics of what it means to be man, the successes that come with it, and the amount of women, and I understand that. But what is important to know is that we reproduce this because we know as social beings that we must have power. We must have access to things. And when you do have those things, you have a particular kind of status quo, a particular kind of respect. And everybody wants that, right? Even within, I mean, even although we push against labels, I mean, people ask who's a man and who's a woman in a relationship because we know in normal circumstances, sorry, perpetuated circumstances, somebody has to be a man and somebody has to be a woman. But it's so because society is really trying to catch up with the understanding that it's two men together, right? Or if two femmes become together, we label them as lesbians, or we label them as sister. You're with your sister girl, eh? You understand? So even so, because we're trying to maintain the binary even within our culture, right?
So you see, therein lies a very complex issue, and I think that people, Sohan is saying, oh hell yes, the macho appearing gay men strongly discriminates on those of us who doesn't fit that box of machoism or being a man. I'm oftentimes, and I mean very often, told by other gay men, you seem like a strong guy and you are a great guy, but I can't go out with you or been seen associated with you because you too real or too out there or you too popular, etc., etc. And that oftentimes come from their need to preserve their act of being straight. Sohan, I'm so glad that you have the strength to share that comment because, girl, sister, as Marcus just said, we in the same boat sometimes because I recall when I was younger, uh, I was told that same that was told to me as an issue why somebody couldn't date me. They liked everything else about me, where my intelligence, the things that we had in common, even we may have shared the same color as our favorite, but I was actually told a couple times that, and I always share this joke with some friends. A guy told me once, he said, "Could you be less gay?" Now, initially, I myself thought he was referring more to what he saw as me being effeminate, I guess. And I asked him, I said, "Do you mean that I am too effeminate?" And he actually said what Sohan said at the end there. He said, "Well, actually, no. It's like, does everyone have to know you are gay?" So I asked him. I said, "Well, do you want me to call all my friends and tell them I'm not gay anymore?" But you're right, Sohan. I think, Marcus, many of us are just, because you're talking about hierarchies, right? So sometimes we are on the receiving end, and sometimes we are on the giving end. No pun intended. Where it's almost like it's hardwired inside of us that we fit into where we are on the spectrum, and then we look up and look down, and we reinforce what we need to reinforce to maintain whatever power that we need. I you know and it seems like we're getting into a very psychological type of discussion. But if we are to unpack these things, how then do we, as a community, treat with these? I don't know what is the correct word to call it. I'm using the term hardwire or hardwiring, but technically, what is that called? When when you have these things inbuilt inside of you, it's socialized into you, right? um, how do you treat with that as a community and as an individual, so that we can start breaking it apart and moving towards a more equitable approach to life? I mean, just to, before you answer, just use the prime example of like Grinder, where I know that they have started removing certain filters. They've started, I believe, with race, but there's this huge thing about femme, fat, and Asian, right? So how do we treat with it? Let's start looking at breaking it up and moving to a different reality.
Yeah, I think we have to understand that we are social beings and we become gender socialized from very young, right? From what is appropriate colors and the type of play or even the type of housework that we do, right? Um, the kind of spaces we are in, who has access to safety easier, which men tend to in particular spaces, especially, you know. And I think we understand that we become social beings from very early. We've been taught as men that we have power, we have access to certain things. I mean, for some of us who have sisters, we know that we were able to go out and lime at the same age that our sisters were still being told where you're going, come home by 10, right? Or by 8 or by 9, or where you're wearing, where we were never told that. I mean, we pass savannas every day and we see a group of fellas playing sports, not because they're more athletic, but because they're just socialized to see themselves as almost invincible and safer and allowed to do certain things. So we understand we become social beings. Um, I think remind me the last part of the question that you wanted me to unpack.
That's it. How do we begin breaking it up
Right.
as
How
an
do we
individual
how
or a
do we begin on
community?
yeah.
Yeah.
So when we understand that we're social beings, that we've been given power, privilege as men, right, to do certain things, right? And some men more power and privilege. So in comparison to us, straight men would be given more respectability,
Right.
right? Straight men cisgender presenting men, less feminine, would be given more status quo than us, right? And we want to ask all men in all spaces, because the recommendations that I am about to give allow for everyone to allow every type of identity to exist, right? Remember, we push back against identities that goes against what society wants as normal, right?
Right.
So if society say that sex work is immoral, unethical, then we as a dirty people who just live on the streets because we grew up in a class governed structure in our own homes, we are going to see sex workers as a particular kind of person because we grew up in a privilege where we have good jobs, you can access jobs, you can access education, and we just don't understand the lives of sex workers as men or as people. So we really do have to start unpacking that. And what everyone can start doing is, one, we have to reflect firstly on our privilege. There's no way that we can move forward if we don't acknowledge our privilege, because then we start bringing into our discussions biases, right? People like you and I could easily say, so why does you study your work so you can pass for QRC or pass for Hillview? It might become easy off the tongue for people like you and I, right? Because we've lived that experience, right? So we really have to unpack that privilege. Hey, we had working class parents, we had parents who were literate, right? We had safe communities, right? We had extra money to go for extra lessons, right? If that is the case. So we really have to unpack our privileges that we come with, right? And secondly, we have to engage and listen to those who are being oppressed. We cannot create narratives for them. So straight men have to listen to the queer community, and then gay men in the gay community who have particular privileges have to listen to those who are oppressed as well, right? So yeah, I think those are two recommendations I would leave with now: acknowledging our privileges and reflecting on those who are calling out and saying that they're being oppressed because of their gender, because of their gender identity and expression and sexuality in this.
We have a comment from Friends for Life. It may be cool, and or Luke, I'm not sure which one. These are all sentiments we've been regurgitating through the decades. These have been and still are very difficult conversations. I'm hoping the chat moves into how do we begin to give. Sorry, uh, my bad, I lost it part here. How do we begin to change? How do we begin to give the next generation the tools to change the narrative or perspectives among or within our TLGB at all, as well as how do we adapt without compromising our non-gender conformity? Yes, Kerwin, we are going to get there. I do think, though, sometimes for those of us who are in it, and that's why I've been asking what might seem obvious questions to some people, or questions they already have the answers to, because we are in it and we sometimes understand these things, but we really want to break this down to a granular level for others to understand. And then, yes, we are going to get to these solutions shortly. Marcus Sharon asks here, if we believe that knowledge is power, now that we are exposing patriarchy and the negative impacts not only on females but also on males, do you believe we are approaching the point where we are more prepared to move away from the narrow focused construct of male and female toward a more realistic, embracing definition of human being as opposed to male and female beings?
I think that's an awesome question, and I think it has to be at the forefront. What we need to understand about patriarchy, and I like to use the word rejuvenating. Patriarchy is a system that tries to rejuvenate itself, right? Look at all the progress that America made under particular kinds of gender conscious leadership, right? And then a particular person came into power and undo all of these things. I think Brandy could tell you that when Trump came into power, sex workers, trans, LGBT folks lost funding,
Yes.
right? And this is because a particular type of
They've
patriarchy
been banned from
predominates.
military for
Right,
even
exactly.
protecting their own damn country.
So as much as we are pushing, patriarchy will push back. And we see that with particular kinds of men's movements, right? Where they're not understanding that the patriarchy is not them per se, but is the cultural beliefs and values that they perpetuate, right? And they think that women are saying that men are bad. They're saying that their experience as women and their femininity in relation to masculinity and power puts them in positions of subordination. So the patriarchy is attempts to, no, it rejuvenates itself, right? Because we always want to go back to that place of comfort of what is normal and what is okay, what we deem to be okay. And
Now, there's a second part to her question, but I will ask it along with Kerwin's later on. But
mhm.
I wanna tie up something else that has come up in different conversations. So we pivoted and we showed we obviously unpacked the fact that gay men carry around a lot of these issues and biases with them. But and I there are some people on the call. I mean, I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but you may know who you are. You can probably jump in with Marcus and answer this question. You read stories in the newspaper, Marcus, or you listen to some women speak at times, even the way that mothers raise their sons sometimes, or what they allow, as you mentioned it earlier about allowing the male to go out when the female is kept at home, etc. Do women also, are they also hardwired with some of these issues? And if so, what are some of the manifestations that we have to be on the lookout for in that regard? And I think by extension, do some women also reinforce patriarchy and macho culture?
Yeah, so a lot of the backlash that we're seeing is that men groups are saying, well, mothers are raising boys in a particular way. Mothers are encouraging them to do certain particular things. One thing that we've known is that women become caretakers of patriarchy. Bell Hooks tells us that, right?
Who's that? Sorry, what's your reference?
Bell Hooks.
Bell Hooks, okay.
Right? She tells us that women become caretakers of patriarchy. If we know that in order for the most attainable, respectable masculinity is a particular kind of man, right? Women will know that that is the kind of men that we need to raise. Same thing with femininity, right? So yes, women do perpetuate notions of patriarchy. They're no different because it is a governing system that maintains masculinity and femininity. So yes, women do perpetuate notions of patriarchy.
Amanda took
Hi.
the plug there.
Hi. So, Marcus, one of the things I want you to follow through on in this point that you are making in terms of how women perpetuate notions of patriarchy, and of course, we're talking about gender as an embodied performance. Could you talk about in the queer community the ways in which lesbian women, bisexual women, or even trans men embody toxic masculine culture and represents that toxic masculine culture, which of course is a perpetuation of patriarchy?
No, again, as I said earlier, that masculinity and femininity become socially constructed. People learn these things, people subscribe to these particular behaviors. Whatever becomes the attainable idea of masculinity and femininity becomes the reproduction, given whatever bodies you're reproducing it, whether it be trans, gay, whatever that means, right? I think what happens is that people learn to be sexual beings. So gender influences the way in which we become sexual beings and within relationships. And queer people also reproduces those toxic ideas given what we know, what it means to be man and what it means to be woman, right? So particular culture says masculinity means to be aggressive, possessor, whatever, right? If you are a lesbian who are subscribing to particular notions of masculinity, that becomes the idea that you subscribe to, or you've been socialized and understanding as it means to be a man, right? I don't know if that helps answer your question, Amanda.
It does, and it leads to another question, which is, within queer communities, and especially in forums such as these, do you think we need more interventions in our conversations around sexuality concerning the deconstruction of gender as a performance?
Well, I think that is what the movement is about. It's really about saying that it shouldn't be boxed, but it should be appreciated on an individual level. I think also the idea that that we as a movement don't understand the fundamentals of what we're doing. So some people come out and say, well, I'm just saying gay rights, but what does that really mean? What does fighting for gay rights really mean in its social context? Right? Are we fighting just for people who subscribe to particular types of sexuality to have rights? Or are we really challenging the social structures that prevents particular kinds of people from accessing love, care, respect, and services? And I really do think that the conversation has really grown in the last couple of years as Kerwin noticed that we've been saying these things over and over, and he's asking what is the next step as Sharon now is asking us if we're becoming empowered because we're being educated. Now that we know these things, we really have to be shifting and thinking about the narratives and the type of campaigning that we want to do. I always like to reference the idea around Colin Robinson in a women's walk a couple of years ago did a poster that says, "End domestic violence, give a boy a doll." And it really taps into the fundamentals of domestic violence, oppression, power, and control. Because we don't grow up boys to be sensitive, caretakers, they don't loving, they don't understand those roles, right? And to be part of this movement means that we have to challenge the gendered roles, the privilege, and the power that comes with being particular kinds of human beings. And Colin did so by asking people to give their boy child a doll so that they understand the value of life, caretaking, emotions, feelings, and what it means to be in a healthy relationship, right? So that it could end the conflict that exists between men and women, and then conflict that exists holistically.
Right. One last question, and that'd be the end of it from me for tonight. These essentialist arguments sometimes around gender have provoked phobias within the queer community, and phobias specifically around biphobia, transphobia, both towards trans men as well as towards trans women. How do you propose, therefore, that we address phobias while also articulating these conversations around gender as performance?
Right. I think let's just look at internalized homophobia. Internalized homophobia is when one desire clashes with one's social expectations, right? And I think one of the things that we have to do is by placing value on the number of ways people can express or you using Judith Butler's language perform, right? We have to revalue and value the multiple ways in which people exist, right? That is the fundamentals of gender justice and the type of work that all of us are doing. We are replacing the value placed on difference. We are shifting essentialism, because essentialism says that one thing has to be a particular way, and only when that one thing is done like that, then you can get everything that you need from life, right? You could access the social pie with ease, right? But because you dress and act or pray or have your hair in a particular kind of way, you lose value, right? And we have to understand that we have to place back value on everything, right? And the way we start doing that is by one, listening to the oppression that exists, right? Understanding the history of oppression, right? That is why the Black Lives Matter is so important for all of us to stand up in solidarity. Black lives are just not now. The systemic oppression that exists with Black lives, trans Black lives, are those that existed way before our times that are living in today's. Right?
Yeah.
And when we did the first recommendations I gave, Rudy, which is our privilege and our power, we will understand, right, that because we don't live Black lives and we don't live particular kinds of economic distress, right, or oppression that particular Black lives exist in, or Black lives exist in, right, we understand that we need information as to the historical context about how these people were living and functioning and devalued, right? Some people might say we have free medication, right? But trans lives, because we understand conversations around power, privilege, essentialist values, religion, culture,
Education.
gender culture, right? Gender norms, gender hegemonic masculinity. When we understand the history of gender, we understand why today, although healthcare is free, why trans persons don't access it easier than some, or access it at all. Right?
Thank
So I
you.
hope that does answer your question, Amanda.
Marcus,
Yeah, of course.
take a
And
glass of water.
yes, beginning of course with an understanding of that the fact that we are all valid and that we are all legitimately here and moving forward from that basic understanding. Thank you so much, Marcus, for these great responses, and you're doing a fabulous job in this discussion.
Amanda, before you go, would you be
Uh-huh.
so kind as to define some of those terms for our audience who may not be familiar with them? So Marcus went a little bit further with it, but I wanted to ask you, gender as performance.
Right.
Could you unpack that one for us a little bit?
Okay, well, it begins with the assumption that, let me just go back one page. And that is to start with a definition of thinking of gender as essential before I go into a discussion of gender as performance, right?
Okay.
The conversation around gender as essential starts with an assumption that there are certain ways of behaving and ways of experiencing the world that only one gender can engage. So there are certain things that are specific to women and nobody else could possibly ever enter into that area. And similarly, there are certain things that are specific to men. So for example, in some conversations, you would hear people begin by saying, well, as a man, or somebody may begin a statement by saying, as a woman, and think that this qualifies them to speak on this topic, when in fact anybody could have this experience. If we understand gender as fluid, anybody could have those experiences. And transphobic persons usually use very essentialist arguments. So when we hear people like J.K. Rowling, for example, talking, they're always saying, as a woman, there are certain things that only I could understand, and no one who has ever been experiencing the world in a different way could possibly access these things that only I can understand. So that is understanding gender as essential. When you go into understanding gender as performance, you begin from a different perspective, which is nothing is essential and everything is learned. So from the time you come into the world, you start learning things, and these things are given to us in our primary socialization within the home space and our secondary socialization outside of the home space, in the school, in church, or in any area in which we are engaging with people socially, in which we basically learn gender and reproduce it. And throughout our lives, it becomes an embodied performance of these things that we've learned.
So
Does that help?
yes, and wait, I have another one for you. We spoke about masculinities, as Marcus reminded us. There are, there's the hierarchy and various forms of masculinity. But you introduced toxic masculinity, and we really didn't touch on it earlier. But when you use that phrase, again, please unpack that one for others who may not be familiar with it.
Well, thank you, Rudy, because this is a nice one to further the discussion around gender as performance, because some ways in which gender is performed can be destructive, not just to the person who has embodied the performance, but also to the people the person engages with. Similarly, there are some ways in which gender performance can be very positive, you know? So there is positive masculinity as well as toxic masculinity. Similarly, there is positive femininity as well as toxic femininity. So the ways in which the performance of gender becomes destructive to the individual person as well as to the community, that is defined as the toxic representation of that gender performance.
Wow. Thank you very much. I hope people on the call know you may have to sign up for a class sometimes or a workshop. Let me give Amanda and She Right movement a plug here, and also Marcus and the Institute. I always mix this one up. It's Institute for Gender
And development.
and Development. So it's IGDS, not I, right? So it's IGDS. Sometimes you all may have to sign up for a class or a workshop with persons like Amanda or Marcus, Brandy, and others to get this type of understanding. So we're very happy. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing your knowledge and your learnings with the wider community, because that's what we're here
You're
for.
welcome, Rudy. And of course, thank you for creating such a platform.
We are happy to.
I think I think I want to just sort of I kind of want to bring it back to queer culture, queerness, and queer experiences, as
Sure.
Amanda just defined toxic masculinity, masculine ideas and notions, and all of that. And I would really want to show how even like, for example, attributes, attitudes, behaviors that are normally associated with masculinity is not bad. Being a leader is not bad. Being strong is not bad, right? However, when it is only placed on men, right, it becomes a pressure, right? So, for example, all men don't want to be strong and aggressive, right? All men don't want to have women, right? So the patriarchy kinds of forces these ideas onto us as ways of living, right? And it puts problems onto the way in which men experience themselves. So I want to share that, for example, in my work, in my thesis last year, when looking at Indo-Caribbean males, survivors of child sexual abuse, one of the reasons why these men did not come forward with their abuse, who were raped at like, who was, abused at like 5, 8, 6, that kind of age, and are now like in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and why they didn't come forward or feel like they didn't come forward is because they didn't live up to the masculine expectation. Men are expected to be aggressive and rough and tough and leaders. So they thought that they lost their masculinity. They will lose their masculine status if they tell people that they were a victim. People may ask them, well, why didn't fight off big man like you, right? Or big boy like you, because we still call little boys small man. You understand? So we put those notions of manhood onto little boys early o'clock, and that created a barrier, right? The fear of homophobia, sorry, the idea of homophobia, right, placed a lot of them in silence, living in silence, because they know that boys, right, are supposed to be doers of sex, and only women are receivers of sex in a patriarchal culture, right? A heteronormative patriarchal culture. And as a result, they were afraid to say that they were abused because people may view them as effeminate, right? And they also were afraid that people would take away the conversation from their abuse to their sexuality. So all of these things around masculinity adds pressure to men as well, right? It makes them live in silence the minute that they can't live up to the status quo, right? Or they do particular things to ensure that they live up to the status quo. Suicide, male suicide, a lot of it, right, could be linked and could be explained through the idea of failing their masculine expectations, right? There's a researcher that some men in India, some farmers, had lost the rights to plant corn, right? Some big corporate company was selling you the rights to plant corn. So what they used to do is that they would, whatever they reap, they would take some seeds from it and then plant it. But now the corporate branded their seeds so nobody could reproduce it unless you buy it, right? A whole capitalist money-making thing. As a result of failing the idea of being a man, which is to be a provider, make money, have a job, the fact that they failed having these masculine characteristics led to the mass suicide of the farmers in India, right?
So let's that when you share anecdotes like that, it really makes one stop for a moment and pause. And I mean, we have limited time tonight, but I don't want some of these points to be glossed over. So people think about that for a moment, that people in their identities are, as Marcus said, they recognize what can happen to them, or the pressures that they are faced with, and they actually take their own lives or harm themselves as a result. So I mean, let's understand that what we're talking about here is not academic. It's not just what's written in textbooks. It affects many of us, and sometimes we need to reflect as well. Are we either caught in as a victim or a perpetrator, and then what do we need to do? So Marcus, let's use this then as a segue into getting into some of the solutions, right? But I want to segue by touching on one or two problematic areas that we've touched on in the conversation. One is, and Wade is talking about it in the chat. He said, the masculinity and physical appearance in the queer community, right? But I want to add on top of it a layer, because and you will correct me as we go along, but I'm hoping maybe you could answer both questions in one. What about also, even in the Black Lives Matter movement, you saw this need for people to remind others that you're also talking about Black queer lives, Black trans lives, because it seemed that there was this disconnect between those groups of people and when people talked about Black lives. And I'm adding a third layer on top of it. Even in brown and other communities, and again, I keep saying you touched on things as we went along, but I don't want to lose the points, right? There seems to be these hierarchies, right, as you mentioned it. But again, Wade is talking about physical appearance and masculinity in the queer community. Is it the same issue within other communities? So the example I used was the Black Lives, and well, the Black community and the Black Lives movement, and the fact that people who did not look a certain way or were perceived a certain way, they seemed to be excluded by some within the very movement itself. And also, I've heard you talk, like last year at your discussion, or it was a discussion that Faye had organized for us. You spoke about even within the Indo community, what it means sometimes to look a certain way or to perform certain masculine attributes. Are all of these things the same things, or are they different?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to piece together all of these things, because you're also fleshing it out in your head, the question. I think I will go to Wayne's question in the chat. I think earlier we spoke about whatever is that desired masculine trait, right, in whatever particular society, becomes the most respectable, the most desired, the most appreciated. And so, for example, if we live in a culture where the magazines and the music videos are all about muscles and small waists for women, and if that becomes the most celebrated image of what it means to be man, cisgendered heterosexual man, then it becomes the most desired in spaces where people are trying to maintain some kind of order and power. So we live in a world where we're very superficial, full stop, and we shame particular bodies and skin color, and we know that, right? Height and all of these things become markers of what to get social status or not, right? We know light skin is more valued over dark skin. We know straight hair is valued over curly hair, right? So we know particular types of bodies, given the culture that you exist in, right, will have particular kinds of respect, right? I think that we've heard the experiences from Sohan that spoke about how femininity, when men express femininity in a male body, how that becomes undervalued and for question. And you lack certain things like love, especially in the gay community. A feminine gay guy in the gay community has harder access to love and respect because he's not filling in the masculine expectations, even though everyone in that space is gay, right? So it is vital for one, for us to hear the experiences. So we need different queer voices to share their experiences within their body. That's why I'm documenting the experience of Indo-Caribbean drag performers, right? They perform femininity, right? They live in some of them live in particular cisgendered lives, right? Male presenting. And how does all of that contribute to our struggle, right? So I think it's important for us to consider all of those as we unpack our privilege, our power, and we listen to our brothers and sisters, right? And everyone who has a particular kind of experience so that we don't reproduce toxic ideas of what it means to be normal.
I see Amanda. I don't know if I see your hands is up. I don't know if it's for the
Yes.
particular.
Thank you, Rudy. I just wanted to comment on the point you were raising, Rudy, about the homophobia within the Black community and the necessity there was within the solidarity around the Black Lives Matter movement to insist on the validity of Black queer lives as well as the validity of Black trans lives. There is a psychosocial reasoning around why there is such an intense homophobia in the Black community, and this historically goes back to the period of enslavement of African heritage people in the Americas, which includes the Caribbean, and that is just the fact that behavior was so heavily policed. Behavior being so heavily policed, and the internalization of that oppression by the Black community follows with a communal policing of behavior as well. And one of the ways it is most heavily noted is the policing of gender norms. So there is a very toxic idea of masculinity, just as we were discussing before, as being just one thing. And any step away from that is heavily policed, and there is a swift reinforcement of the norm. So that is just my contribution to that, because there is a very powerful line that comes from Audre Lorde, in which she says that we are not single issue people. So of course, in any discussion around race, we have to talk about sexuality, we have to talk about class, we have to talk about religion, we have to talk about the myriad things that make us up as human beings and make our experience in the flesh a more fully realized one. And so it is important and happily noted that within the Black Lives Matter movement, there is this insistence on the validity of Black queer lives and the validity of Black trans lives.
Thank you.
And as Amanda explained, those particular realities as outsiders, as supporters, as persons standing in solidarity. Again, it goes back to the basic recommendations where we have to listen to these experiences. We have to understand the historical context in which they exist. Otherwise, we're just going to come with particular male class privilege and expect particular things from people who we don't understand from, and then the system is just going to reproduce the oppression without understanding the systemic situation that exists, right? So again, I wouldn't speak for Black lives, but I could speak about what it means to be in solidarity, what it means to just stop, listen, and be criticized, because to ask someone to consider their privilege is a type of criticism. It doesn't sit well with a lot of people. People think that when you tell them that they're living in privilege, like, oh well, I was a little Indian boy who gay too. You know what I mean? But no, we're asking people to look at your privilege in the context of what other people are saying and how you access things differently from how other people access things differently. Because only when we understand all of those, when we put all those little pieces together, we're really starting to change the way in which we value and consider the lives of everyone, right?
So that's a fantastic launching point then. So let's go back to Kerwin's question for a moment, right? How do we begin to give the next generation the tools to change the narrative or perspectives among and within our TLGB et al, as well as how do we adapt without compromising our non-gender conforming selves? So you want to expand? I know you gave us two very direct suggestions, but in terms of adapting without compromising and passing on tools to the next generation.
How do we begin to change the narratives, perspectives among within our TLGBT et al? Well, one, the fact that this type of conversation is actually being endorsed, celebrated, being viewed as ideally. So we're starting to look at campaigning and movement capacity, right? The information has been out there. What we're doing is no different from what the feminist movement has been doing, what queer movements, more established queer movements have been doing, right? Documenting our stories, yes, these are all vital. I think making it readily available, right? Mentoring those who are interested, right? Or even those who just want the knowledge becomes a really good place to start. I think not being holders and greedy of intellectual property, right, is a good place to start, right? Changing those narratives means that we have to share the historical context. We have to not be afraid of the existence of queer lives and all people who have been oppressed in history. We cannot see it as something boring. We have to acknowledge the history, right? Only then we are able to understand the narratives then, the work that has been done then, and the work that needs to be done now. We can even learn and borrow tools that our ancestors have been using, right? I mean, we may not be pelting stones like what had happened at the Stonewall Inn, right? Or it might be called for. We never know. But we have to not be afraid of our queer history, right? And I think our new generation is really tapping into that. They're really tapping into the literature. They're really tapping into the language. They're really exploring new ways of identity and all ways of movement building. And I really do think that we have to have that sense of challenging the fear of the history of queerness, right? It is a very sad one. I mean, but we could only move forward if we understand that trans lives were viewed differently, right? We could only be able to make an understanding of what the queer movement is if we don't hear the stories of those who've been doing, who've been living trans for the last 30 years. Right? So we can't be afraid of our history, and we can't be selfish of our intellectual property. You think if Brandy didn't have the guts to share her story, we would know what those experiences are? We
Right.
can't be afraid, right? And I think the fact that we remain authentic and we live in individualism will ensure that we don't compromise our non-gender conforming. We've learned in the earlier session that people use labels to get a sense of identity, to find some comfort, to explain some of the experiences that they have, right? But the fact that we celebrate and we value all beings is the only way that we could not compromise non-gender conforming, right? When all that exists, that all expressions, right, that all creations have value, and more so equal value and equal access to things.
I see Wade, you have your hand up. Would you like to make a contribution or a question?
Yes, thanks. So, I would like to also suggest that when each one of us and each group thinks and talks about this sort of advocacy that we are doing, that one of the ways that our younger generations can help to improve their own quality of lives to understand what fundamental human rights are. Because I'm sure most of you in this chat tonight cannot name the 30 articles of the UDHR. We know some, and I think that's one of our feelings as a Caribbean community. We know that we have these rights, but we don't know what they are, and we assume what they are, or we read it occasionally. But if we really want to bring home what is true to us, and stand up for something and win at getting our rights, we have to know what they are, so then we can challenge those who intend to withhold them from us, with some sort of authority that says, this is what I am owed. And very often I have noticed, being an older person in the community now, that people advocate for specific rights now. So they've become focused on an issue, but there are no human rights advocates anymore. Because if you're a human rights advocate, you can't just advocate for one things from the article or two things from the article of the UDHR. You must genuinely want every single thing that's listed in the UDHR, regardless of who it belongs to.
So, Wade, and I'm not saying this facetiously at all because we've talked about it at meetings, etc. This year, we wanted initially to put a focus on the SDGs and human rights, and as you rightfully say, all human rights, because we wanted to cross those intersectional lines. We are going to take you up on the offer to have you and others host those sessions where we can really learn the entire spectrum of what these rights are and why each one is important, etc., and get some programming behind it. Because if we don't, if yes, I understand why some persons and some groups would zone in on one or the other, but there must be a holistic appreciation of all of these rights so that we start viewing each other's challenges and seeing where we are part of either the problem or the solution. So I'm glad, thank you for that intervention on it. Was there something else you wanted to add, or was that for now for it?
No, that's it. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm
Of
trying to
course.
figure out how to put my hand down.
Well, remember, we're using the term more experienced and not old, but some people will say the more experienced of us are learning the technology as we go. So
I
much
am proud of my
experience,
age. I
right?
don't mind being called old.
They told us they're going to call us more experienced. So, Marcus, we're looking at the solutions and moving forward. And I think Wade raised a good point about holistic understanding as part of what we're doing here tonight. But Sharon, I want to just go back a quick moment to the second part of Sharon's question that I said I would hold on until this segment of the conversation. She says, and you may have answered it in part, but I just want to air it in case there's something in it that jogs your brain in a different way. How can we actualize a society in which our boys, girls, women, and men can actualize and live their authentic lives? I mean, I'm sure we could add, Sharon wouldn't mind if we added non-binary. I'm sure she, how can we actualize a society in which all of us can actualize and live our authentic lives?
Well, again, I go right back down to the fundamental idea of valuing people for who they are, right? But this has to be done wholeheartedly in every space possible, right? Before we could even get to a place where people are valued, we have to bring the experiences, we have to raise the consciousness, we have to challenge the human rights violation part of it. It is a combination of work that is being done, right? That brings a sense of value to multiple peoples and their experience. You see, unfortunately, we live in a society that wants to maintain the binary. Patriarchy is maintaining the binary. Men on one side, women on one side, and everything else outside becomes a threat to essentialism, right? Until we are able to get to that place where everyone is valued, we have to be pushing against the grain. We have to be ensuring that things like legislation and representation are in its place, right? And that oppression does not become part of the system that maintains the binary, right? We have to be pushing against the system of patriarchy. And I'm going to tell you that the feminist movement has started the foundation as to what we need to do. And we need to get rid of the patriarchy. We need to get rid of a system that says one thing holds more value and is more respected in a space than another. And that is why we say we need to get rid of the patriarchy. We're not getting rid of a person. We are getting rid of a system that places value on one body and devalues everything else that is outside of that body, right? People who are differently able would tell you that they experience the oppression because they don't fit the essentialist idea of masculinity and femininity. They are not structured physically. It goes back to Wayne's question about the physical. If you don't have 10 fingers and 10 toes, you are going to be placed in a box separately. That is why children with Down syndrome who are in wheelchairs are treated like pets.
Yes.
Right? If we have a system that understands the value and wants every human being to have a access to be contributing members of society, right? They have to value all life, whether you're a man, you're a woman, non-gender conforming. We have to change the way in which society values the contribution and ensure that the system meets those who want to contribute. Right? We are seeing that there are people who are Down syndrome but are lawyers, are gymnasts, right? But we also see that they access those things because of other intersectionalities like class, race, money, all of these things help them get to that, right? But we need a system that values all life and ensures that everyone can access things, right? And that is why this type of movement, this type of work, this type of activism, this type of gender justice continues to do that. So to me, once you push against the value system, right, at any point in time, hopefully the patriarchy wouldn't say men superior, women inferior, and anything that is feminine inferior will have a place where you have a disability, we have ramps in all buildings, right? It will come to a place where the color of your skin does not matter. right? But you have access to things, not because of your geographic position. You can't get into particular schools or you can't get jobs. We need to revalue human beings, right? And I think that kind of mobilization, that kind of consciousness, once embedded in the movement, right? Especially by the men of the movement, right? Once we revalue, or once we add value onto everything and we acknowledge our privilege and listen to the criticisms, and we start to see that particular kind of change,
I
a
think
more equal change.
I think too that some of us, perhaps more so those with the privileges, we have to, and I'm using this word deliberately, but a bit facetiously at the same time, we have to also police in a way. We have to do the reverse policing, where if we hear or observe our own persons or peers tripping over themselves and reinforcing these stereotypes and making mistakes, we have to correct them. We have to educate them. And I don't mean in an exclusionary way, of course, but can we talk a little bit about that, and at the same time the power of allyship and where allies fit into this work?
I think one, just understanding how masculinity operates. I do agree that men need to be the one pulling up their brethren, right? Trans women shouldn't be asking to be respected, right? If there are men out there who understand that this is the particular experiences of these women, you should be telling your brethren that is not how you treat people, right? Yes, trans women have been sharing their experiences, queer people have been sharing their experiences, oppressed people have been sharing their experiences. But in terms of understanding masculine spaces and criticizing masculinity, only because this is a conversation, right? And this is part of the work that needs to be done. We need to have men tell other men that they're doing shit. We can't see, the thing about it is that nobody wants to lose power and nobody wants to lose their privilege,
Right.
right? And as a way of doing that, men stay silent, right? If I lie in with a bunch of men and they start to suit Amanda, right? And I know it is wrong, so that I don't lose my masculine status, I will stay silent, right? Because I don't want them calling me gay or asking me what to me. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
But we have to push against the discomfort and call out our brethren for perpetuating patriarchal ideologies,
You know,
right?
in some of my, because I do have a fair share of straight guy friends, I I, I found myself having conversations with them, um, not wanting to justify their behavior, but I was sensitive, I should say, to the fact that they really seemed completely oblivious to the fact. But ironically, they were engaging in certain behaviors that, if one were to give in to the stereotype, you could use the same terminology to describe them that some of them would have used, especially in their earlier life, to describe who they perceived as a less masculine man. And what I'm talking about, for example, is you see on the football field sometimes, or in sports generally, men embracing each other, sharing a kiss, tapping one another on their bottom, trying to be, and like, it's almost like you see them navigating intimacy, but they're not quite sure how to get there. Um, what would you say to them then? Like, we're extending an olive branch to our, to, and I'm speaking generally, of course, but to our straight male counterparts. What would you say to them, as an ally, as an LGBTQ ally or TLGBI ally?
Well, firstly,
Them.
straight allies have to acknowledge their straight privilege. Because I remember when I did my workshop, I think Wade was there and you were there, Rudy, when I did my workshop last year, and the cisgendered heterosexual woman in the audience said, But why don't they just do hold hands and walk through movie tongue? Or just,
Yes, I
why don't they just do
remember.
hold hands? Right? It's,
Yes.
you see, a failure to acknowledge your privilege will perpetuate the stereotypes, perpetuate the oppression with not understanding what needs to be changed. Why she didn't say, well, I go and tell my straight people to harass gay people for holding hands.
Right.
Right? Also, we can't be putting the responsibility of changing social systems on the oppressed. So a lot of allies like to say, well, why you don't do this? I have a bunch of straight friends who's like, oh, you need to hold more workshops. I say, if I have hold any more workshops,
Ah,
if I hold any more workshops to educate straight people, I will go mad. Right? Why aren't straight people holding workshops to educate straight people? You understand? So as allies, you have to reflect on your heterosexual privilege. You have to listen. Again, the same recommendations for everyone, right? You have to listen. You have to be open to the criticism, and you cannot expect the change to be done by those who are being oppressed. That is not what change means, right?
but it was
Social transformation isn't that I had to hide Brandy and carry she into the hospital, right? I don't want to get my straight friend to drive her and get she into the back door. That is not social transformation. Social transformation is when the doctor, the straight doctor, tell all the nurses, yeah, what? This is how affect people, right? That is where the change has to happen. We have to start holding our systems outside of our queer spaces accountable and to be held responsible for the social transformation that we want. Right? And we need allies to do that. We need our straight allies to be holding their counterparts responsible for the way in which the system continues to oppress.
just a couple notes before I throw some last questions at you or some commentary. Alphonsus says, sure thing. I believe that it's clear that more research has to be done so that we get an idea of the historical context. Alphonsus, as I believe it was either Amanda or Brand, I'm reading Brandy and I'm looking at Marcus, or Marcus said, a lot of this research has been done, especially by Caribbean people in more recent times as well, because we've started to unpack it in our context. But I think your point is taken in that it needs to get out there more, and we'll see what we can do to help that happen. Alphonsus goes on, Marcus, to say, I fear that it's something that we don't talk about often enough, and it's limited only to a certain time of year instead of year round. So, you know,
I want to also just say that yes, although the academic is important, right? But let me tell you something. I go right back to my first recommendation of listening. If we have a listening culture and a culture of taking responsibility, there's no need for academia to inform the way that we do this work. If I could sit down and listen to the experiences of trans women, right, and take into consideration the criticism and of being a cisgender presenting male, and I know that I need to step up and do particular types of work and take the responsibility for perpetuating transphobia, right, by making fun of femininity or making fun of certain things. We don't need, academic is just an important part of understanding our complex society, yes, that we live in. But I am asking people to do some very simple things, like asking our straight allies to sit down and have a conversation with queer people and what their lives are like, right? And to hold yourself responsible for those experiences, right? So you walk down the street as an effeminate guy and a man brought out from the car, faggot, right? But how many of our allies or people are taking responsibility to say that, here, what now? Don't call the man faggot, no. Don't call nobody faggot, as a matter of fact. Where is that narrative, right? So it's right back down to a basic culture of listening to the experiences of others and taking responsibility and not hiding in silence, especially from the patriarchy and men.
now, Alphonsus raises an interesting, I mean, we're getting perilously close to the end, but you really see that, we can go down the rabbit hole even further. He says, but it's also a delicate balance to be made, because much too much to the straights and even to the LGBT plus people, the over sexualization of sexuality is too easy and even lazy a method used to portray what is the lifestyle. Because the truth is, to me, that much of the LGBT lives pretty normal. Hate that word, but I'm pretty sure people understand what I mean, and people need to understand that. So I guess he's touching on a couple, 2 or 3 points there, right, Marcus? The over sexualization, and you touched on that earlier, I think, before Alphonsus joined us. That
Could you highlight? Could you send it in the
yes,
Zoom chat?
absolutely. But I wanted to throw at you, and it might be a little shady of me to do this for our straight counterparts, but I see there's needs for some shade sometimes, and I'm not talking about elm trees, but I found it miraculous that very heteronormative, sometimes toxic masculine men feel, especially nowadays, very comfortable wearing, and you will forgive the stereotyping, but wearing clothing that at one time was seen as clothing for our community. And I joke with some of them. I said, well, you have your balls in your pocket. But what has allowed the metrosexual then to find, was that straight heteronormative toxic masculine men redefining power dynamics so that they could enjoy what they always wanted to? I'm raising it because it's such a topical thing. It's like it's just a physical thing, like you could just see it.
I
And
think
how they dress, how they do their hair now. There are many straight men that take care of their skin. I mean, and again, we're not giving into tropes and stereotypes, but what has allowed for that to happen?
yeah. That's actually a really good question. So what happens is that patriarchy have a way of claiming things, right? Patriarchy have a way of rejuvenating and maintaining and claiming certain things for masculinity or for masculine men. So, for example, when Jamaican men started wearing those tight pedal pusher looking kind of pants, right? It became normal because collectively men were saying, but it's normal, right? Collectively men were celebrating it, right? At the beginning, yes, there was push and tug against it, right? Particular types of clothes, particular types of wear, yes. So the patriarchy have a way of taking things and owning it, right? Clothes becoming one of it, right? At one point in time, men used to actually wear heels. It was about status,
Right, yes,
right?
yes.
And then they say, you know what, that's too feminine, that's for women, right? Let me tell you something. In the world of work, in social spaces right now, because women have really claimed their agency in a lot of things. A lot of people, a lot of scholars are saying that the only thing that men have right now is crime and sports.
Wow, that is very deep.
Because think about it,
And
the minute that
shocking.
women overpower any particular spaces or femininity takes over, is either men step back, like the school system. Years ago, it was mostly men who teach, it was headmasters, right?
Right.
And when women became teachers, because it said, that's that nurturing, caring thing, it said that, oh, the industry is too feminized now, right? So again, we see how patriarchy has a way of either taking things for themselves or stepping away, because essentialism say that men must have their space and women must have their space. And it's really, really about getting that idea about anybody should have access to anything and not be threatened by it. Right? People should not be threatened when anyone, whether it be a woman or a queer person or person with disability, accessing spaces, you should not be threatened by it. And the patriarchy is so fragile, right? Masculinity is so fragile. The minute it has a hint of femininity or non-heterosexuality in it, it becomes something of an outroar. And it needs to be protected, it needs to be pushed against. So I really think that those are like some really core things that we have to be thinking through.
No, and I want to just add to what you're saying from a personal point of view is that, you know, notwithstanding the privileges that I may have had from just being born into, also had to, I had to learn from a very young age that you had to build other privileges to navigate society. And by that, I mean, you touched on it earlier. I had it to always almost be perfect at everything I did. And that became the shield and armor, whether it was at school or in the workplace, because you are not afforded the graces. And people, look for any and all flaws that they would sometimes forgive others, but you are not allowed that, even that simple mistake. Wade, I see your hand going up there.
Hi, so I just wanted to that comment that you made about the style of clothes that men are wearing now, but this is nothing new, you know. That sort of gender fluid expression has been happening globally. I mean, in the 1920s and 30s in Paris, gender fluidity was a very fashionable thing. And then we saw that happening again in the 60s and 70s with David Bowie and that whole entire movement.
Right, correct.
But in 1982, something very interesting happened at a global planetary level. The
Uh-huh.
United States government had changed, and Ronald Reagan said that he was going to reintroduce something called traditional family values. And it sparked a global expansion of American traditional Christian values. And then that started spreading rapidly across the world, and that spoke to a lot of this sort of patriarchy, and it sort of reinforced a Pentecostal belief that men are the head of the homes, and then they started projecting, and it sort of created at that time too a global movement of raising men to power because, you know, countries as well started wanting to position themselves in terms of power, and then they started pushing this messaging and imagery of men of power, and that became a culture in the 1980s to showcase men of power.
So you see, thank you, Wade, very much. The more you live is the more you learn. I'm a student of history, and it does color how I look at life in the present. And Marcus, Wade, Amanda, and others, whether through your comments, verbally or in writing, I think everyone is calling on us to understand more about where we've come from, where we are, where we want to go, how we get there, etc. And Marcus, we could go on and on and on, and I'm sure there's much more that's in your brain and others as well. But we are at our closing time. And I want to throw something out at you before you give your closing commentary. And that simply is, I do think that over the years that we've run PrideTT, we have we've been forced in a way to be closer to the ground than some of us used to be. And I do see some change. I do see persons correcting, persons trying to learn more, being more compassionate, willing to, as you say, recognize privileges and mistakes and go forward. Some would say maybe it's moving a little too slowly. But as we close tonight's session, again, given your work, the spaces that you move in, the way you look at life, can we end on a hopeful note? And can we say that in the year 2020, that there is more to look forward to in terms of moving towards some of those states as described by Sharon and others? Um, or are we left kind of where we were all along? Has the needle moved, or has it moved enough?
I mean, we are seeing progress, from the cross-dressing laws in Guyana to same-sex loving couples having rights to report domestic violence. I mean, and given that kind of opportunity, we're seeing more trans visibility and safety and solidarity and support. I mean, yes, we have made a lot of um, dents, and we have improved on a lot of the accessibility and at least the consideration. We have raised the consciousness. I think, however, this work cannot be too much at ease, because as I've noticed that at any minute, some particular patriarchal leader, person in leadership could come and change all of that. We have seen how in times where particular laws were passed to protect some people and presidents came and removed it, right? So as much as we have made strides and we have made improvements, and we have openly gay people on campus, and we have gay flags um, in non-queer spaces being presented, and so we're seeing we're seeing the needle moving. Yes, I agree, but I really don't want people to get too comfortable, because from where I sit, it is easy for someone to come and push us right back into old ways of thinking and old oppressions and rewrite all of the work that has been done. So I really can't, I really have to say that yes, we've made moves, but don't get too comfortable. And that's how I would want to end.
Well, thank you for that. Sharon as well says that she thoroughly enjoyed the provocative session, and she thanks everyone for their contributions. So just before we close, I'm going to put our co-director, Eva Chavez, on the spot a bit and ask her to share with everyone about an activity that's coming up on Friday, Eva, with Sharon and Amanda and Shahan and others. If you're hearing me, you want to just share a little bit before our viewers tune out? Or Shahan or Amanda, anyone, Faye, any of you would like to just share a bit about that activity on Friday? So I maybe, oh,
Hi.
yes, go ahead.
I realize that some people may have tuned out for the evening, but the activity on Friday is a workshop around intimacy, sex, and sexuality for women who love women, and this was organized by Sharon Motley, and it's divided into different contributions by women who have been doing work in advocacy for a long period of time, and we are collaborating with much younger people who are coming from the Pride UE entity. So among the speakers are Faye Fernandez, Nadine, Eva, Shahan, and Epiphany. So this conversation is going to look at issues such as sexual diversity, ageism within the community, navigating healthy sexual relationships, among other things. So it takes place this Friday, and it is scheduled to start, I think, at 8 p.m. So all of the information that I just put forward, as well as corroboration of the exact start time and information concerning the speakers, their bio and backgrounds, such as those would be on the event page in the lead up to Friday.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you very much. So yes, we will post all that information up as well. But as you can see, we have been able to touch on many niches in our community over the month. So Marcus, thank you very much. Again, thank you to all the persons who contributed, and Marcus in particular. I know you all spend a lot of time studying these things. It's your profession, it's your occupation, it's your passion. And for you to come and be open and answer the questions and break things down, even when maybe to you the answers are a bit obvious, or as Kerwin said, we've been doing this for many, many years. But this is just a start, and we continue to welcome you and partner with you. And I believe from the number of heart emoticons that are going up on the live feed right now, that people got a lot of benefit out of the conversation. And we're going to take this as a foundation stone, as we're doing with all the other talks. And let's see how we can move the work forward and assist you with your ongoing projects. So thank you very much again, Marcus.
I just also want to say, through the Trinidad and Tobago Transgender Coalition is how I was able to, really sit and conceptualize a lot of this conversation. I think that the fact that there's a lot of intersection and solidarity work happening at the Transgender Coalition really is a space for young people to come and learn about new old ways of activism, and what that work looks like as we aim for a gender justice world, a gender just society. So again, it was only possible that I was here because of the support of Brandy and her team and her organization, and who really supported the idea of me really having this kind of conversation, and bringing, my knowledge and my passion. And as much as people think that this is academic, I always describe myself first and foremost as an activist, right? And a person who just willing to listen to persons' stories once they're willing to share, so that I wouldn't reproduce the issues that society is reproducing, right? So again, thanks to Trinidad and Tobago Trans Coalition, and thank you for having us to discuss this particular issue.
Thanks, Brandy and Trans Coalition, as always. So guys, if you want the work to continue, please support PrideTT either through volunteering your time, as Marcus and Amanda and others do, or we would love to have some financial contributions. We believe empowerment, like charity, begins at home. And as you all know, we have our motorcade on Sunday, our grand motorcade. And this year with COVID-19, we weren't able to host events, which is part of our business model, to cover some of these costs, but we want to continue our work. So please share the message. We are accepting donations of time and money, and yeah, it's been a fantastic season of learning. There have been times of emotional exchanges and problematic conversations, but tomorrow we continue with our town hall series, Queer Votes Count, where we'll be wrapping up our empowerment manifesto, at least for this month, and taking it into the election campaign. And then Thursday, we have a very exciting conversation with Miss Brandy and others on the topic of sex work. So you'll please register and tune in for that. And as you heard on Friday, we have our Women Who Love Women discussion, and that takes us into the Pride weekend and some others in more, how should I say, some more social activities. So follow us, continue to support us. We love everyone. Please be safe and continue to enjoy Pride, TT, and yeah, stay in touch with us. If you need any support or you have suggestions, reach out to us. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, and we'll be in touch again soon. Take care. Happy Pride.